Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the Indigenous Origins Global Reach Promoting Native American Products. I'm Chloe Mesh, Director of Programs at WUSADA, the Western U.S. Agricultural Trade Association. I wanted to go over a few housekeeping notes. So today's session will be recorded, and we will email you the recording link from our YouTube page within the next few days. You'll remain muted during the presentation, but please submit your questions anytime throughout the Q&A feature. We'll also address questions during our dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation, and we'll follow up by email on anything that we don't cover live. If you would like to say your question out loud, there will be an opportunity for you to request a live call-in button where you can raise your hand and enter the queue to ask your question live. So today I'm pleased to introduce Will Collis from Bryant Christie and our guest speaker, Michelle Huff from Bare Beans Foods. So for today's webinar, whether you're just exploring international markets or looking to expand current exports, this session will show you exactly how to succeed. We'll cover the essentials, so meeting global standards, food safety, securing the right certifications, and more importantly, turning your cultural heritage and unique stories into competitive advantages that international buyers will value. By the end of this hour, you'll have a roadmap to prepare your supply chain, ensure compliance, and position your Native American products for success in global markets. Well, let's get started here, and now let's dive in. And Will, over to you.
Thank you, Chloe, and thank you everyone in the seminar for the opportunity to present to you today. My name is Will Callis. I'm the Interim Director of Market Development at Bryant Christie, which is an international agricultural affairs firm focused on expanding and building market access for U.S. agricultural and beverage products. I've been working in the U.S. agricultural export promotion field for nearly 10 years now, across Asia, North America, Europe, Southeast Asia, and Australia. I have not done any work in Africa, and honestly, my personal experience with Native American or Indigenous, products is relatively limited, but I'm hoping that my 10 years of experience in other fields can really help build your knowledge base for export promotion. So with that, our objectives today are to go over the market drivers and global consumer trends, certifications, standards, and labeling, building a global brand, storytelling, and heritage, discussing export readiness and supply chain, and then, as we mentioned, we're going to have a case study from the folks at, from Michelle. So, market drivers and global consumer trends. One thing that's important to remember, that you need to build value through story and heritage. With most Indigenous products, the idea is that you are going to be selling a story to the consumers, and that means that your item is more than a commodity. With that changes the end consumer that you are generally targeting. You are going to be ideally selling to consumers with a higher income, who are willing to pay a higher price point that allows them to support an idea. And with that, clear communication is key. So who is that consumer that you are trying to target? Generally, it's going to be upper, middle income, or higher in terms of income. They're going to be making their purchase decisions based on morals, not necessity. So people who are literally trying to get enough calories into their system or their family system are really not making a decision on which product here has the best story. They're going to be making a decision based on price and what is going to provide them with the best value. If you are going to try and differentiate your product based on the production methods, the producer's heritage, etc., that is going to be someone with a higher disposable income. Generally speaking, one drawback to this consumer segment is that it does grow and contract with economic situations, especially on the lower end of the lower end of that consumer's income scale. So in certain scenarios where someone feels like, you know what, I'm doing well, I am going to opt for the thing that has the better story, or that I support morally, or that I feel like I should support because of the background. When those people are in a tighter economic situation, they may decide not to opt for that product, instead going for potentially the store brand or something that has a lower price. So in terms of export markets, where are you going to find the largest consumer base that fits this storyline? Well, that's going to be, you're going to have larger market segments in more developed nations. Places like Canada, places like Europe, Australia, potentially Japan and Korea. That doesn't mean that there aren't consumer bases that have high incomes that are willing to make those differentiated purchases in lesser developed countries. It just means that, generally speaking, it's a smaller segment of the population. One comparison that we always use is that, generally speaking, Canada is seen as a premium market. There's about 40 million Canadians who have relatively high incomes and who are often able to make these types of purchasing decisions. For comparison, Mexico has roughly 100 million people. However, the number of people in Mexico that are able to make differentiated pricing decisions is actually, in all reality, less than that in Canada. So you're looking at probably something like 20 to 25 million people in Mexico who are willing to make that designation between quality and price at the upper end of incomes. So even though it's a larger country, there's less people to target with really specialty products or premium products. More often than not, these folks are going to be in urban centers with affluent, educated consumers willing to pay more for authenticity. And that's where you're also going to find more specialty and gourmet retailers, natural food stores, and premium marketplaces. It's much more challenging in rural areas to have distribution and sales for folks who are looking for those items, and they will generally travel to the urban centers to find those products. So what are the trends that are driving demand from Indigenous companies? Authenticity is driving purchase decisions. International consumers are drawn to foods rooted in Indigenous traditions because they reflect a genuine cultural heritage and regional identity. This cultural storytelling builds the market value. Sharing the origins, harvesting methods, and ancestral knowledge behind Indigenous products helps convey authenticity and connect consumers to native communities and landscapes. Sustainability and stewardship also stand out. Sustainability has been a big growing consumer trend around the world. I know there's been some challenges related to sustainability marketing in the United States recently, but in places like Europe, New Zealand, Australia, you're still seeing a huge push for sustainably produced products. Indigenous producers' longstanding commitment to land stewardship, biodiversity, and respectful harvesting aligns with these global sustainability trends. The biggest challenge that we often find is, especially at the consumer level, is conveying the full extent of your story. Because especially when we're at a grocery store, it's often challenging to get enough time for someone to look at your package or your item to understand the full extent of their story. And so that's really where the challenge comes, is communicating as much of your story as possible in a very small amount of time. Here we chose to highlight a few different products or different categories that we think potentially could have strong potential in export markets. So one would be heritage grains and pulses, whether it's ancient and regionally adapted grains such as indigenous corns, beans, and lentils, which are gaining global attention for their nutritional value, their contributions to biodiversity and cultural significance. Wild rice, which is highly regarded for its distinct flavor and origin story. Wild rice represents a unique opportunity for native producers to enter the premium health and gourmet markets. Proteins and other natural foods. Lean, sustainably raised bison, for example, appeals to consumers seeking healthy, ethical protein sources, while raw and specialty honeys connect with clean label and wellness trends. Of course, these are just a few options that may be available to you. And then finally, herbal teas, with foraged botanicals or handcrafted specialty foods offer pathways to differentiate native brands and showcase traditional knowledge in export markets where it's focused on authenticity and wellness. So with that, next comes what we find is often one of the most challenging barriers to new exporters, and that is going to be certifications. So we've kind of broken this into two categories. We've got the essential certifications, and on the next slide, we'll talk about voluntary certifications. But one thing to think about is there are also what kind of end up being mandatory voluntary certifications, and that is certifications that are often mandated by your customer, with your customer being retailers or importers, to ensure that you have access to the market. So they're not mandatory in terms of the government, and they're not necessarily mandatory from any other regulatory perspective, but because of the commercial relationship with the retailers in the foreign markets, you are mandated to get certain certifications. So first, I'm going to talk about the essential certifications, what I would call more the governmental certifications. So exporting food products requires meeting both U.S. and destination country standards to ensure safety, quality, and traceability. And compliance builds buyer confidence and prevents border delays. So you're going to have to produce everything within, whether it's the USDA or the FDA's regulation, depending on the product, of course, that you are producing. FDA more for food products, USDA if you are doing meat and poultry, and comply with the Food Safety Modernization Act. Beyond that, you have to understand what the requirements are in the foreign market that you are going to. For example, if you were targeting exports to China or South Korea, both of those countries have facility registration laws, where if you are producing a further processed food, or even honestly produce, if the produce is being packed into a box, that facility has to be registered with the Korean or the Chinese government for traceability purposes. This also applies in Europe, although I'm less familiar with the exact regulations there. So understanding that you would have to have your facility where you produced your product registered with the Korean government prior to exporting to that market is very important. And then finally, you've got your third-party and food safety programs. Global buyers often request certification through recognized schemes, such as Good Manufacturing Practices, HACCP, or Global GAP. There are other third-party certifications that are often, like I said, fall into this voluntary required category. One that is very common in Europe would be complying with the British Retail Consortium's food safety practices, which is essentially the British Retail Association's standards, which are often higher than many governmental standards around the world. What are we talking about when we talk about voluntary certification? So, for example, organic is a voluntary certification. You're not required to be certified organic, but it can certify that indigenous grown crops are produced without synthetic inputs, meeting strict global organic standards. Now, one concern that comes with these voluntary certifications similarly is, do we have recognition of the organic label in the United States in a foreign country? There are certain countries where you cannot label your product organic if it's only been certified organic in the United States. Some countries you have to have a third party come in and certify that you have met the organic standards of that foreign market. So it's important to know that when you're coming in to have someone do your organic audits. Similarly, fair trade. Fair trade recognizes native producers who ensure fair labor, equitable trade, and community reinvestment, appealing to ethical importers and consumers. Other sustainability certificates, this is a much wider range of categories, but they can validate traditional stewardship practices such as rotational harvesting and biodiversity protection valued by eco-conscious buyers. And these certificates, combined with authentic storytelling, as well as being products shipped from the United States of America, which has a strong history for food safety and a strong reputation for quality, can build a global market advantage. So finally, let's talk about going from land to the label. Labeling products as Native American grown or tribally produced helps international consumers confirm authenticity and recognize the unique cultural and geographic origin of indigenous foods. I don't believe it's on this slide, but one thing that we want to make sure that you are communicating is people will often try to piggyback onto ideas, and this is something that we've seen in Canada this year. But by saying indigenously inspired or indigenous, it's styled after something that is produced by indigenous peoples, but is not produced by indigenous peoples. We've seen similar trends, not to the same extent as cultural appropriation, but in Canada this year we saw a big pushback against U.S. products in Canada, and certain food companies tried to get on the Made in Canada bandwagon that was very popular across the spring and summer, and put a label that said produced for Canada with a big maple leaf on the product. Even though it was 100% produced in the United States, they were trying to act as if they were producing in Canada. And we've seen that also when it comes to certain indigenous products. So making sure that you're able to communicate the authenticity through your transparency is important. Similarly, origin labels can showcase the connection to tribal lands, traditional growing areas, and its ancestral foodways, adding depth and value to the product. And then storytelling creates emotional connection. You want to communicate whether it's traditional harvesting methods or intergenerational knowledge and cultural stewardship that connects consumers to the history behind each product. And eventually, this consistent messaging across packaging, marketing, and digital platforms can build brand recognition across the board from a consistency perspective. So how do we build a brand? Respectful storytelling for indigenous foods. It's important to feature your tribal expertise and heritage, and highlight how the tribal knowledge guides planting, harvesting, and preparations of foods, whether it's hand harvested wild rice, or bison raid according to traditional stewardship practices. We want to showcase unique product characteristics, explain what makes the product distinctive. Is it flavor? Is it texture, nutritional qualities, or seasonal cycles? Connect to cultural practices without commodification, of course. So you can present ceremonies or storytelling or seasonal rituals in context to honor their significance without turning sacred traditions into marketing gimmicks. This is one that's especially challenging at times with distributors. So you may be communicating your traditions in a very respectful way, or the way that you would like for them to be communicated. But if you have a third party selling in a foreign country on your behalf, it's important to understand that you have a strong relationship with them and have communicated how you want your product to be talked about, so that they do not present your product in a way that you won't prefer, or that you don't find to be the best way to communicate the message. And then, of course, use clear and actionable storytelling, focusing on tangible narratives, how the product is grown, how it's harvested and brought to market, to help international buyers understand its value and provenance. That is one thing that can often be challenging to communicate, right? We are often dealing with foreign buyers with foreign languages who are not as familiar with indigenous American cultures. And so you are having to communicate not only your unique indigenous culture to someone from outside the United States, but there's also the possibility of a language barrier. So it is important to try and be clear and actionable in the storytelling. And we want to maintain authenticity in these global markets. And this is maybe where I got more to that point. If you look here, when I was talking about groups that often say indigenous inspired products as opposed to being indigenously produced. So we want to integrate traditional practices into product identity, showcase farming or harvesting methods such as seed saving, hand gathering, or natural soil care as part of the product's heritage, reinforcing authenticity and environmental responsibility. We want to Differentiate through genuine tribal sourcing, emphasize verified tribal ownership or community partnerships that contribute directly to native producers, helping buyers trace products to their true origins. Tailor your narratives to trade audiences. Frame your cultural context within the export priorities, such as food safety, traceability, and sustainability. Because when it comes down to getting a distributor or an importer partner, no matter the strength of the story that you have and the message behind it, if you cannot make them confident that you can meet the regulatory barriers that are present in their country, the likelihood of securing a sale is still relatively low. And so it's important that you're able to merge these two, both the cultural aspects of the product or the story behind the product with the real hard business of import and export, where you have to have your facilities registered, you have your food safety documentation in place. And that applies to all products, of course, but it's important to try and weave them together. And then finally, protect authenticity through branding, using trademarks and tribal identifiers to distinguish native grown foods from native inspired products, ensuring cultural and economic benefits remain with Indigenous producers. So let's talk a little bit more about export readiness and supply chain considerations. So export logistics can vary widely in their complicatedness. Complexity, I think is probably the proper word. It ranges from products with an extremely long shelf life, which could be something like a dry bean, or it could go all the way to something that has a very short life, where it could be tribally produced produce products that require refrigeration to reach their export destination. But all of these are going to need to meet the requirements that go into these foreign markets. So first thing off is export documentation. Documentation can often be one of the biggest hurdles to new exports. So it's important to have your tribal producer certificates, certificates of origin, and any required USDA and FDA export paperwork to verify authenticity and meet import standards. For fresh products, that often includes a phytosanitary certificate where it's been certified that the product has no pests of concern for an export market. You would have to have the proper certifications from USDA, FSIS if you're doing anything related to meat exports. I know there's additional certifications related to seafood exports if that was a consideration. And then all the necessary documentation would need to be compiled and sent with the shipment. Next, if you're dealing with any sort of perishable products, cold chain management is a huge consideration. Using insulated or refrigerated shipping containers for perishable goods, whether it's refrigerated or frozen, bison, honey, fruit, other perishable products is critical. And understanding how the cold chain management happens from your point of departure to your eventual destination. It's very important to understand if you're shipping something to Mexico, how the cold chain is handled when you reach the Mexican border, how that product is transferred into the wholesale marketplace or how it's transferred to the retailer, understanding your secondary partners in the market and that they're presenting your product at the highest quality level and they're not allowing that cold chain to break. Other things are customs compliance. So confirming import rules related to tariff and labeling requirements in each destination market. That's a huge thing. We had a presentation earlier this year about exporting to Japan. And if you are putting together a further processed product that requires a nutritional label in the United States. So we don't need nutritional labels for fresh products, but for further processed products, we do. It's important to know that the requirements to meet the necessary items to meet FDA compliance with food labeling standards are different than those in Japan. And if you have an FDA approved food nutrition label, that would not be approved in Japan, and you would have to make a new label to apply to your product if you're shipping to Japan. Similarly, things like allergens can vary widely across markets or how they need to be called out. So it's important to know what allergen labeling would be on further processed products. It's important to know how country of origin labeling is required. In certain markets, the end product at the shelf needs to have country of origin labeling. In some markets, it simply needs to be on the master container, so it needs to be on the box. But it varies widely by market. Many of these things, by the way, if you have questions, you can reach out to USADA and they can assist you with understanding what the regulatory compliance problems are in the market that you're going to, or they can direct you to the expert that knows more about that. And then finally, understanding the logistics partners. You want to work with logistics providers familiar with native food products and small batch exports to manage customs cold chain and deliver efficiently. We were talking earlier this year about exporting produce to Mexico, and we had a case study from an onion producer out in eastern Washington, I believe, and he was saying one of the biggest lessons he learned is that when he first started shipping to Mexico, he was working with a smaller importer, and they had a truck breakdown on the other side of the Mexican border. And because this importer was newer to the market, he was unable to secure a second truck, and they had to wait to get their truck fixed. And he learned later on, it's important to understand the partner on the other side of the border. Are they able to secure a new truck if you have a problem? Or are they able to change over drivers if you have a driver who times out on their shipping or on their hours for the day? So it's important to work with trusted logistic partners, understand where you can have complications. And also, if you are exporting for the first time, it might be important to work with an aggregator, because you might not be shipping full container loads of product. You may simply have a few boxes or have a few pallets, and that they're able to properly handle your product, aggregate it into a container, and get it where it needs to go is very important. Consistency and traceability are also super important, and traceability can be more important in certain markets than others. Consistency is more about commercial relationship, right? Or consumer relationship. It's less about regulatory in all reality. But if the consumer or the buyer is getting inconsistent products, that could lower their confidence in making repeat purchases, because from purchase to purchase or from lot to lot, there are variations in the product quality, sizing, texture, etc. So it's important to standardize your production and processing to maintain flavor, texture, and appearance across all batches. And this is critical for export buyers and eventually for consumers, because if people are getting a different product each time they buy it, they may question the production practices. Traceability is a huge thing, especially when shipping to more developed international markets. Europe is a big one. You need to use lot codes and harvest records or digital tracking to document where and how indigenous crops or products were grown and handled. Much of this is often required, especially if you are in the fresh meat or fresh produce business, because it's required in order to ensure that if there is a pest or a food safety outbreak, they can get back to where the source of the product is. And much of this is also required under the Food Safety Modernization Act. So I would assume that many of you are already doing this, but it can have additional requirements in foreign markets. And so it's important to understand what those rules are. Maintain export-ready records for accurate documentation, including your ingredients list, origin statements, and tribal production verification for customs and buyers, and have a transparent supply chain. Work with trusted suppliers and processors who uphold indigenous stewardship values and meet international traceability standards. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Michelle Huff from Bare Beans, who is going to talk to you a little bit about her experience with launching an Indigenous brand and her additional experiences in that realm. So with that, we'll turn it over to Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Huff. I'm the CEO of Bare Beans, located in Rupert, Idaho. I am a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, and I have launched a ready-to-eat bean product. I started the company in 2018. My prior experience before that was in the fresh produce industry. I worked for companies that marketed fresh potatoes and onions across the world. And my husband is a fourth generation farmer. So as I was in the produce world, I kept hearing the term value added. And I love beans, but I hate canned beans. I love them homemade. I had a love-hate relationship with beans. And my husband grew them. And so I decided to, I joke about this, but I decided to literally bet the farm on this new company that we could make a brand new product that is unique and different. So what we do is this is a little sample of what we do. We do a fully cooked, ready to eat bean. It's fully cooked, put into a vacuum package. We have retail that we're about to launch soon. We have a food service size that is about this big. It's 4 pounds. We also have a industrial size, which is 10 pounds. As you can see, a lot of different beans. We do garbanzo, black, red, pinto, navy beans. We grow a majority of our beans, but I do have to source at times. But the whole concept behind Bare Beans is to give the consumers a quality scratch-made product without all the junk that's in canned beans. Canned beans are a World War I technology. They take the beans. I'm going to give you a little history on canned beans. They take the beans, put them into the cans, add all the liquid. They add the salt, the preservatives, the color additives, the firming agents, everything that makes canned beans look like beans, seal it, and then they cook the crap out of the can. We don't do it that way. We simulate the scratch made process. We hydrate them overnight like they should be. We batch kettle cook in big kettles, and we package, and we don't add any salt, preservatives, color additives. We want the consumer to decide what they put in their food, not us. Like we don't, there's so much stuff added to food that our whole philosophy is, you decide what gets put in your food, not the producers that sell it to you. So based on that concept, I launched food service first. And in fact, I got my very first order in January and February of 2020. Yeah, bad timing with COVID. We weathered the storm of COVID. I decided to launch food service first because that was my background and that's what I knew. I knew the distribution methods. I knew how I wanted to package it into a food service case, get it to the people that I needed to get it to, and that's where my connections were as well. We soft launched some retail packaging a couple of years ago in the Pacific Northwest. We had some success, but because it was packaged differently than this, we weren't getting the shelf life that we wanted to out of it. So we've redesigned our retail. It now looks like this. It's going to be inserted into a paper sleeve that has more graphics and nutritional information, that kind of thing. And we're going to hopefully relaunch retail first quarter of next year. So my struggles to start this company was definitely the food safety aspect of it, because I'm selling a ready to eat product, so we had to have one of the highest levels of food safety. There's different levels. If you've got like a raw agricultural product, you can have like a GAP certification on your farm, but let's just say I was selling dry beans. Your farm can have a GAP certification, but if you're further processing it, you need a higher level of food safety certification. And we actually have an SQF certification that took a long time to get to that level. It incorporates all aspects of HACCP and all those fancy scientific words. But I'm very involved in the food safety part of the company because if I don't have a safe food and I don't have these certifications in place, I can't sell to my end customer. Right now, one of my biggest customers is Cisco Foods throughout the United States and Canada, and they require a very high level of food safety. So if your goal is to get to an end user like Cisco or Whole Foods or any of those type of outlets, your food safety has to be solid in place and you have to have a good score on it as well. food safety audits, usually passing is around 70 to 100%. But like in my case, Cisco, they require I have a 90% or better. So just because you got a 70 doesn't automatically mean you're going to be accepted by your retailer of choice. You have to, go above and beyond and be in the 90% range is my recommendation. If you don't know what you're doing in food safety, you hire the people that know what they're doing, get a consultant, help them build a plan for you. It's my biggest recommendation is get your food safety in check and in line. And if you have that, it opens doors everywhere. The other thing that has kind of been a little bit of a challenge lately is, like I said, we're relaunching our retail package. Labeling claims are really important. We made we've gone through, I don't know how many revisions, maybe 10 revisions of our outer sleeve carton that's going on this. One of the things that took us a minute to figure out is we wanted to put on there, because a lot of people are on GLP-1s and the Ozempic and the Wegovy, those type of shots. We wanted to put on it GLP-1 friendly. We thought, what is that going to hurt? Well, once we really dug into it, we found out that you're making a claim that you're helping people that have diabetes and you're helping them to get better, cure their diabetes in some way through food. We can't make those claims. So you just have to really be careful of what you put on your package and what you're claiming, and make sure that it's not claiming that you're going to cure, something that, yes, we all know eating healthy is important and it's part of making us whole again, but you just really got to be careful of what you put on your labels. One thing that we also did for our retail package is I reached out to indianag.org. They have a trademark certification process for Indigenous people, and I threw it up in the chat. We got a made and produced by Indigenous people trademark on our package now. I went through the certification process to get that done, and they're very nice people. So I highly suggest you put that on your package, because that helps tell your story of who you are and how you came to your journey. And it just, like Will was saying, that there's a lot of people out there that claim certain things and imply certain things. This is a for sure legitimacy of your product if you are Indigenous and Native American. So I highly suggest you go through that process and get that done. We're hoping that it'll help. Like I said, we're just launching retail. We're going to be in some stores again in the Pacific Northwest, and we're also going to make an Amazon store. So when we get that out there, we'll share some information. We're also going to the Fancy Food Show that in the WUSADA booth, January 13th or 11th through the 13th in San Diego. We've gone to the Fancy Food Show before, and that helped get our product out there. And WUSADA gives you some great space and at discounted rates as well to be in those shows. I just saw the chat. Small world. I was raised in Rupert as well. Hi, Joe. Nice to meet you. But it's starting a food company and staying true to your native roots and your morals. It's tough sometimes because you have to weigh the cost of getting those certifications and doing all those food safety things and doing all those important things versus how much cash flow you actually have when you start a business. And it's really tough to make those decisions sometimes on what's more important, the marketing of your product or the food safety aspect of your product. And all of those costs add up. One of the other certifications that we got was non-GMO certification. That's another added cost to your product. So those things are very important, but you just have to weigh what exactly is important to put on your package and just be truthful in what you produce and how you produce it, and the message that you're conveying to everyone. And like Will said, really look into the different countries that you're shipping to, and make sure that you're following their rules. I don't have a lot of experience exporting to Europe, Japan, Korea, Australia, that Will had mentioned. I only go to Canada right now. I'm hoping to get into those markets someday, and hopefully I can share a little more expertise on it. But right now, I just don't have a lot of experience. Somebody wrote,
Michelle, I have a question for you. Outside of kind of the hard stuff, how have you found it? We talked about selling your story, right?
yeah.
But what techniques and strategies have you taken to communicate the story behind your bean products, and explain it? I assume they're at a premium to canned beans. So how are you convincing Cisco and some of your other partners that there's the value there in your product, and to support your small business?
I had to differentiate our product against canned beans. So one of the first things that my product, you can visually see that it's better quality than canned beans. The smell, the sensory aspects, the taste, it's just a quality product because it's made, it simulates the scratch made process. So it's scratch made quality, which I think we all crave. And it's, canned beans are very manufactured. And so I think that's important to stress as well. Minimally processed is a real big buzzword right now. And so we're incorporating that into our package. So we've just, we've really dove in, like Cisco. We've tried to get into school districts, universities, places where a very clean labeled product with the high quality is valued. So you just have to keep conveying your message, that you're another alternative in the bean category, but you are better, and this is why, and this is what makes us better. So just get your core qualities and what makes you better and sell it. If you tell the story right, you'll get there. Along with our retail launch this first quarter, we're going to put out a pretty aggressive social media campaign, and we're really going to show the difference between canned beans that you buy in the store versus our product. And a lot of it's just education, telling people that you don't have to buy canned beans anymore, or you don't have to buy dry beans anymore and make them yourself. You've got another alternative now. And so that's the other part of it, is just educating your consumer. Because one thing that we've learned too, just because you get your product to, say, a Cisco or to a Whole Foods, it doesn't mean it's going to sell from there. So you have to make the end user come into the store and buy it. That's the main message. Yes, it's a hurdle to get the retailer to buy it, but you also have to get that end consumer to come in and purchase it as well. Because if, say, Whole Foods buys it, but there's nobody coming in to buy it off of their shelf, they're going to discontinue you. So there's a lot, there's levels of marketing to everyone that you want to sell your product to. So keep that in mind as well. Hi, do you desiccate your bean crop? Joe, I'm not sure. I'd have to ask my husband. He's the main farmer. But I will definitely ask him and get back to you. Are there any other questions or anything that you'd like to ask me? Well, well.
Oh, no, I was just popping back in
Okay.
if there were no more questions.
I'm going to put my email address in the chat. And if you have any other questions about anything, or just anything that pops up and you need some help with, if I can't help you, I'll direct you in the direction of maybe somebody that I know that can help you as well. But it's a long journey, and I like to compare it to a roller coaster ride. There's ups and downs, and the ride's not over yet. And we're getting there, but it's a lot, and just be prepared for the ups and downs. So thank you for having me, and I hope I shed a little bit of light on this. Well, I
Thank
do have
you.
a question for you. You mentioned
Okay.
Canada, Europe, Japan, Korea, Australia all are looking for native products. How do we contact those people? How do we find them?
Well, so if you want me to give you the pitch, actually, um, we find honestly, especially for small businesses, the best way to get in touch with people in these markets is to go and meet the people on the ground in these markets, and that's where WUSADA really comes into these situations because especially Europe, maybe not as much, but especially in the Asian markets in Latin America, um, it's still a lot of stuff is very relationship based still, and a cold email or a cold call is not really. I mean, it might generate results, but it's not going to generate as much results if you meet the person, face to face. You shake their hand and you discuss their your products with them.
Okay.
And WUSADA, similar to you going to the fancy fair, which will be an opportunity because there is an international contingent that comes into that.
Okay.
But there was a show, for example, in Germany last month called Anuga. It's the largest food show in the world. WUSADA had trade show booths there that you could participate in. They've had shows in Japan earlier this year. I don't know if someone would have to correct me whether or not they did in Korea, but when it really comes down to exposing yourself to those markets, I think it is important to be strategic. I think really you want to, you know, generally speaking, as a small business or medium-sized business, it's important to explore the markets, figure out which one you really want to invest in, and then target that one first. I think you could end up driving yourself crazy if you decided to go to Australia, Japan, Korea, and the EU all at one time, right? Especially from a regulatory and compliance situation. So it would be do some ground research, work with USADA to determine what the potentials are, and then maybe pick one show to go to and see if that generates any leads or you feel like there's a market niche that you can fill there. And or sometimes it results in I don't think that is the right market for us, or it's not the right market right now. Those are different situations, but I really think the one thing we always say is like go to the market and try to go potentially through WUSADA for one of these trade shows or trade missions. They also lead trade missions where they take you in there and you visit the wholesale markets. You get to see what the retail environment looks like. You get to see what the distribution processes are, and you get to meet with importers and distributors. And, they'll also be honest with you. Do they think that your product has a potential in this market? Yes or no? I really think that's the best way to do it. And I'm not trying to just toot USADA's horn. I don't work for USADA. I think that's the best way to get into a market and figure out if you really have potential there and meet.
Good advice. Thank you. Um, yeah, thanks for having me. Like I said, I put my email in the chat, and if you have any further questions and if I can help you, I'd be happy to throw some advice however I can. There's not very many of us in this space, so I'd like to just even meet you. If you just want to say hi and say, this is my product, let's help each other out. As you can see, I mean, we don't have a ton of people on this call, but I think it's a hard industry to get into as a Native American producer. So let's meet each other and network and see how we can help each other.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks.
That's our question slide. With that, wanted to show off, have Chloe talk about some of the upcoming events, which maybe fit into my talk about getting into the market and meeting the people.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Will, and thank you so much, Michelle. All right, so these are some of our upcoming events for next year that we have. We have the WUSADA State Pavilion at the Winter Fancy Fair. This is in San Diego, coming up just right around the corner in January. Following that, we have the Japanese buyers inbound mission, also going to the Winter Fancy Fair trade show as well. Next, we have the India dried fruit and nut inbound, which is in the beginning of February. And then for the month of April, we have our Best of the West Global Buyers event. We'll be bringing in multiple delegations of buyers. And then following that, we also have a Japan consumer-oriented inbound trade mission to the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariani Islands, as well as Guam.
Well, thank you, Chloe. And the one other thing I wanted to mention that I haven't talked about yet, and this kind of goes more to Michelle's message, but as part of these seminars, Bryant Christie has the availability for you folks to have 30-minute one-on-one sessions with us. That schedule will be going, or the calendar invite will be going out, or the calendar schedule. I don't know exactly what to call it. The link to schedule a meeting, I think is how I would say it, is going out along with the link to the presentation here, and that will be distributed by WUSADA. If you have meetings or questions that you don't want to ask here, or you just have general questions about export readiness or export preparedness, we'd be more than happy to meet with you folks. Oftentimes we'll go back and forth a little bit so that we understand exactly what your questions are, so we can be prepared going in rather than asking, so what are your questions? But please keep an eye out for that in the link in the distribution from WUSADA as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Will. And thank you, Michelle, as our guest speaker. And just like Will said, we'll be sending up a follow-up email with the recording of this presentation, as well as links to the free consultation that Will had mentioned, as well as for a survey. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope everyone has a great day, and we look forward to supporting your export journey. Thanks so much.